just going to introduce Catherine first. I do feel I should be really keeping her a secret because she does have a company behind her, but we do keep her very busy. We probably started using Catherine about a year or so ago, and we've just had such great results, not just from the VR, but from her and her colleagues on the neuro and clinical psychology sides as well. But she's got over 15 years experience in the working in both rehabilitation settings, both within the NHS and the private sector, working with a wide variety of neurological conditions, particularly interest in cognitive rehab and working with individuals and families to manage emotional and behavioural changes following acquired brain injury. She's involved in research regarding acquired brain injury and tele-rehabilitation, and has recently published a book exploring adjustment to brain injury from the client's perspective and family perspective. In 2017, she set up her own service called Sphere Rehab, and with her business partner, and they focus on community integration post ABI. And obviously, we're very community focused here at Think Therapy First, so our models work really nicely together. But she also co-founded, and the reason you're here, the Brain Recovery Zone into Neuro virtual reality platform. That was in 2019. So she gets commissioned by CCGs and also private individuals like ourselves or companies like ourselves. And I just think it's fascinating. And I was going to put on a talk for just our staff so they could find out more about it. And I thought, why not share it with the wider population? So on that note, please mute yourself if you haven't already. And I will hand over to Catherine to talk us through.
Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine.
So, yes, so my name is Catherine. I'm a neuropsychologist and, as Helen said, co-founder of the Brain Recovery Zone, which is the VR platform I'm going to talk to you today about. For context, the clinical cases I'm going to discuss are from Sphere. So as Helen said, we're a community rehab team. And so I'll probably talk a bit about the both because the focus is probably a bit more on the kind of clinical application of VR as well. So I'll kind of just fly through these points. In terms of statistics, we know that 1 in 3 people will have an acquired brain injury at some point in their life. The number of acquired brain injury admissions is increasing. I think there are 13.7 million new strokes each year. So it's not a surprise that the demand on public services is increasing. And in some cases, there are no community services at all. So we are going to have, well, we are thinking really differently about how can we deliver services and the kind of use of digital health. There's been a massive growth as a consequence of that, but with it does come some challenges, and I think so probably one of the biggest ones is thinking about kind of mass adoption in places like the NHS. So I was talking to my business partner Claire, she still works in the NHS, and she was saying that there's just, obviously we know that COVID's essentially been a staff crisis, and so what digital health requires is staff to train and then apply in those sort of techniques and strategies. But actually at the moment, that's very, very difficult to do due to the staff shortage. And so the issue needs to be that there needs to be corporate buy-in about actually investing will help. So if you kind of front load, actually you can reduce kind of costs and improve patient experiences in the long run. And it's very much like neuro rehab. So if you target neuro rehab and front load, patient experiences and outcomes are better, because currently I think the argument is if you're diluting a service which does require targeted neuro rehab, then outcomes are going to be poorer, patient experience is going to be less positive, and staff morale is going to be reduced, so you kind of get a vicious cycle that gets set up. So with that in mind, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Brain Recovery Zone platform. I have a note to show the headset because I managed to do an entire talk the other day and not actually show the headset. So I'll talk a little bit about that first. So as Helen said, we developed the idea in 2019, and I was working with a rehab medicine consultant who is hugely passionate about tech and VR in acquired brain injury rehab. And so he was telling me about virtual reality and the sort of impactful nature of it emotionally. You know, once you immerse yourself in the headset, actually it can provide quite good strategies for managing emotions. And I tried what he was showing me, and I really liked it. And so we decided that we would test it with a few clients and see what the response was. And it was really positive. There was a high level of sort of excitement and satisfaction, and people were engaged. And I think if you've been in VR, you'll know that actually it's a very immersive, engaging experience. So we joined forces with an OT colleague, Lucy, and a speech and language therapist, Holly, and then a little bit later on down the line, a clinical psychologist, Gemma. And so we've come together, and it'll be easier if I show you the demo of the platform, because I can kind of take you around it and explain the different rooms. And then I think it's probably worth talking a little bit about the evidence base, because we drew very much from the existing evidence base of the cognitive rehab model that we all work to, and we drew a lot from the emotional regulation evidence base. And we know, and I think COVID's accelerated this, that there are benefits for tele-rehabilitation. In terms of actual VR evidence base, there's been quite a lot done with stroke rehab to train motor function and neglect rehab. So there's been a systematic review done that has confirmed efficacy, but it has said that there needs to be more research, particularly looking at functional outcomes, which is really relevant considering kind of the basis of neuro rehab is around functional outcomes. I'd also been previously involved in a research study in the NHS looking at cognitive rehab using an avatar-based VR system. So this was baselining people cognitively who've, after an acquired brain injury, delivering sort of a computerized gaming system underpinned by cognitive rehab strategies, looking a bit more at more sort of executive functioning, attentional abilities in more real life settings, and then reassessing cognition after 12 weeks. Unfortunately, COVID hit literally during the study, and so it's been written up. So it's kind of difficult to unpick some of the outcomes, but in essence, people enjoyed doing something that they felt was improving their cognition, and so that was positive. Although people did say that they would quite like a more immersive system. So I'll go around the platform first, and then I'll show you the headset. So this is it. Well, actually, no, I'll do this first. This is, if you were to put on the headset and enter the platform, you would come into this environment, which is the home page, and on it you'll see 3 different rooms. So there's a discover section, which I guess is very much the psychoeducation that we offer to clients and families. There's a practice section, which is more around some strategies, and then there's a calm section. So for the discover section, I spent a lot of my work, or I spent a lot of my time delivering brain injury education. So I would use Google Images and written information about scan results, and it was quite difficult because I think we're working with a client group who, particularly early on, memory affected, actually just working memory, so holding all that information in your mind and encoding it and then being able to retain it is difficult. So, and we were talking to clients about other ways of delivering this information, because it's really important for people to know what's happened to them, and obviously it's different. It's not personalized. This is more about, we've created animations about traumatic brain injury and stroke, but again, it gives people an idea of supporting them to link the nature of their brain injury with some of the difficulties they have, just to kind of make it a little bit more concrete and less frightening. So clients were saying actually having animations would be really helpful. So currently on the Discover platform, we have an animation explaining traumatic brain injury, explaining stroke, and explaining fatigue as well. I just keep pressing play. So I've just navigated to that point. Currently in the practice section, there's modules around motor speech and then an attentional training program, which I'll describe. So the motor speech has been developed by a speech and language therapist. So you can see it involves 3 different areas, focusing on breath support and sound quality, articulation exercises and rhythm exercises. So she was saying, we're not saying as a team this is a replacement for rehab, not at all, but actually some of the strategies that she would want people to practice over and over and over before then kind of bridging on to the next level, she felt could be developed into a kind of automated modules. And actually one of the case studies that I talk about later goes on to explain some of how it was helpful for one of our clients. I'll press. So the other area I've skipped is an attentional training part of the platform. Sort of, it's early days really in terms of thinking about attentional rehab for us, because I'll talk a bit about that later on. But again, when we were talking to our clients about some of the difficulties they experience early on after injury, difficulties with tolerance, both from a visual and auditory point of view, were raised. And I think how VR lends itself really well is that you can generate real life environments, but you can control some of the variables in them where it's more difficult to do that in real life. So we've got 3 different levels. So level 1 being mild, level 2 being kind of moderate, and level 3 being severe, in terms of levels of stimulation. So you'll have level 1 is very peaceful, real life kind of park, bridge environment. Level 2 is busier, so the levels of stimulation are increasing. It's an outdoor market, and level 3 is a really busy indoor train station. And it's just giving people a chance to safely practice exposing themselves to environments that allow them to develop some confidence and tolerance. We've gamified it a little bit, as in we've given people sort of personal best scores to see how long they can stay in the environments for. And it's supposed to be something that people just practice over time and dip in and out of. But this was something that people felt quite strongly that they would use to help as a sort of bridge back out into the real world, to feel that they have a bit more confidence. Because sometimes it's quite difficult to unpick what's confidence, as well as that sort of layers around tolerance and cognitive fatigue. So, and then the calm zone, which is my favourite. So we picked 3 different rooms for this. So the Soothe is very much immersive, low stimulus environments. So you might be going and sitting on the beach or by a waterfall or by a lake or swimming with turtles. Just really, I guess it's quite mindfulness experiences where you don't have to do anything in those experiences, but it just allows you to kind of be transported there. And I think they've done some fMRI studies where they looked at the same area of your brain is triggered as in VR as it is in real life. So it does feel like you are completely immersed in that environment. And we also commissioned a VR team to go down to 100 Acre Woods in Ashdown Forest, and they have some really lovely kind of relaxing footage of being in the woods or looking out onto the landscapes. So that's a very kind of very low stimulus relaxing room. And then this room, stress relaxation, is, I guess, more active psychological strategies that I would do with my clients. So things like controlled breathing, muscle relaxation, mindful breathing. So it's a more active part of the calm zone. And then I think, yes, I'll show you into the nighttime wind down. This is a bit of a whistle stop tool. So really that's the room where you're almost kind of priming your brain for sleep. So telling your brain it's time to go to sleep. And it's a mixture of sort of guided meditation, sort of wind down scripts, and then some, again, low stimulus immersive environments. So I think I'll show you one of them. we also we were thinking about how we embed some self-monitoring tools into the platform. So part of the work that I do around emotional management with people after injury is self-monitoring. So encouraging people to stop and think and notice how they're feeling, which is hard for all of us to do, but it's particularly difficult after injury. Yet what we're wanting to work with people on is managing stress and anxiety, because that's so critical for recovery. So it's not necessarily about whether your scores improve or not, but it's more about trying to embed sort of a self-monitoring technique into a meaningful activity. So you would come into an environment and score how you felt at the time, and then fly into space. So I think that continues through Mars. Right. Oh, so before, I don't know, can you see me? Because I've minimized everything.
Yes.
Okay, brilliant. So I'll just show you the headset. So before we move on, I'll show you the headset just so it kind of comes to life a little bit. So it's basically, it's a device like this. You would obviously put on. You literally just switch it on. There's an on switch at the bottom. It's upside down, so just there. So you literally just switch it on. You would put the headset on. The only other sort of equipment is a controller, so it's just one controller. It'll ask you to connect the controller with the headset, and then once it's connected, we've put it into kiosk mode, which essentially means it just kicks straight onto the platform. So what we wanted to make it as easy as possible for people to use, so you weren't kind of searching around an app store to find the specific platform. It just literally is a couple of steps and you're in. So there's less effort as possible. And it's really light as well. So that's that. Okay, so in terms of where the app sits clinically, feels like we're sort of taking a little bit of a step back and just thinking a little bit about what is neuro rehab, obviously preaching to the converted, but just in terms of where our thinking is, essentially we're looking at, you know, after someone's had a catastrophic life event, what does make life worth living again? So what roles, what values, what goals do people have? And you sort of see this as a bit of a building the foundations of a house. So what comes first, really? And so more from a psychological, well, it's not just from a psychological point of view, but in terms of our approach would be to think about someone's cognitive strengths and weaknesses, really looking at how to balance resources and demands and play to someone's strengths. So helping someone understand their injury and managing despondency with the dose of rehab. So I guess what I mean by that is, we know fatigue can be a real difficulty for people after injury, and there's a risk of sometimes people try and push through that, almost prove that they're them still, which can lead to more fatigue at times. But other times people can withdraw and their world understandably reduces, and then people lack confidence and the opportunity to practice skills. So I think it's finding that right balance, because if whichever way you tip, if you can tell, because despondency starts to kick in. So I think, and for all of us, it's about pitching at a level where people are experiencing a sense of success with their rehab. Otherwise, again, that can make things much harder. So in terms of doing that, mood management is absolutely critical. We know that injury can result in disrupted circuits, so there's a much faster route into emotion. Tasks that were previously effortless now carry a much heavier load, And the critical thing is about finding ways to calm the brain. And with that, behavioural strategies are really useful. So we're wanting to think about providing routines and habits, as I said before, supporting people to start self-monitoring their emotions. Sometimes that can be very difficult to do depending on the severity of the injury. And so we might work with family to scaffold individuals differently. So family might start supporting the individuals to manage mood, or to think about approaches when someone might be in red or amber or green. We kind of use traffic light systems quite a lot. And I think VR sits really well in this sort of recovery template, focusing very much on promoting habits to calm the brain, because, as I said before, that's crucial to manage stress. And I think it also helps in terms of reducing some of the organic barriers after injury, because again, we're working with individuals who motivation can be really difficult at times, planning ahead, remembering to remember. All of those difficulties as a consequence of injury might make it more difficult to embed a strategy in place. But if you can have an environment that's set up and ready to go, like a VR headset, then people can pick it up and practice it as and when they need to. And there is a sense that it's enjoyable, and there's a high level of satisfaction from it. So people tend to return to it. And that's what the premise of rehab is. It's all about learning by doing. So it does feel like it lends itself really well in this sort of scaffolding place. And then I think as you kind of go up the levels, you can start thinking about different talking therapies for people who have been through trauma. But I think for me, the critical bit is the earlier the intervention, the better. And joint work is critical, because people are less entrenched in their symptoms, which I've done a bit of a continuum or a recovery journey, so we'll talk a bit more about that. And so the benefits, I guess in line with that, the benefits of thinking psychologically about what might be going on for someone, we know that a catastrophic event can have a psychological impact, and then that can lead to blocks that then can affect the whole spectrum of rehab goals. So there are massive benefits of confronting the psychological impact at the earliest opportunity. So, we know in terms of adjustment and speed of recovery, it can enhance other areas of rehab, and it can impact upon engagement in realistic goal setting. And bearing in mind, I guess, the goals that people set, that helps people move forward. That can be a really useful part of the process, making sure that we're understanding the kind of psychological blocks that might be within those goals. So in Sphere, we've developed, I guess, different tiers of interventions. So in terms of low intensity interventions, guess what I mean by that is clients who potentially have a good support system around them, there's little historical trauma, they've had a reasonable childhood, but they might be presenting with difficulties with sleep or anger or pain or trauma. What we tend to do is deliver standardized intervention packages with VR embedded in them. So again, what we're saying is it's not a cure-all, but it's a tool that can be used, part of a toolkit for delivering psychological interventions. So we tend to start with a coping with emotions package, which was developed by my business partner. And so within that, there's emotional regulation strategies, and the VR platform sits nicely in there. And one of the cases I'll discuss, that was actually used as quite a big part of the work. Then we might work on sleep. And again, sometimes I struggle with sleep because we sort of know what we need to do, but again, some of the barriers prevent us from actually following through. So quite a few clients use it almost as a bit of a bridge to prime their brain before sleep. And that can be a really useful behavioural tool. Might look at anger or pain or sort of trauma stabilising techniques, more from the sort of stress relaxation zone. But there's lots of different ways you can embed it into already psychologically established interventions. And then we've got the more higher intensity interventions. So it might be working with clients who might be getting stuck, in moving forwards. They might have other difficulties in their lives, might have had some difficult childhood experiences, previous anxiety and depression, might be lacking functional coping mechanisms, and they might just have quite a wobbly support system around them. So that might be when more high level intensity interventions are required. We do adapt those to take into account an individual's neurobehavioral presentation, but we will be working with people using EMDR, IPT, cognitive behavioural therapy. I use quite a bit of compassion focused therapy in my work. And again, for things like EMDR, I'm really interested in working with individuals using this technique who have cognitive difficulties, because I think there are ways and means of adapting. So I've worked with a guy recently and he had real problems sort of visually tracking as part of EMDR. It's a trauma-based intervention way that you process trauma, and part of it is by tracking, so bilateral stimulation. And actually visually he really struggled to track because of his injury, but he was able to use other sensory modalities, so kind of vibrating sensory devices, so that would cause a bilateral stimulation effect as well. So there's other ways around of working with individuals, but it's just about being a bit creative. So in terms of thinking about some of the challenges in recovery and how tech and VR in particular can help, I drew out, and this is by no means set in stone, I was just thinking about some of my clinical experiences and where I might plot people along that journey, sort of a continuum of recovery and where different pieces of work might be useful. And again, I think the timing is really crucial, because we get commissioned by the CCG to sort of bridge the gap between hospital and home. And so it's getting in incredibly early with people. Whereas sometimes I think with private work, it's understandable, but funding takes time to come in. And it might be that you're a couple of years down the line with people and their difficulties can be more entrenched. So I definitely think the earlier an intervention is it put in place, the better. So I just broke it down. It's all very rough, but it's just some ideas around where technology can help. So the early stage of recovery, certainly from what I've seen, people have a sense of hope after injury. There's often a focus on what people can see, so the physical side of things, understandably, and speech. And then in terms of focus of interventions, I think the slide I was talking about, what is neuro rehab, that just feels really relevant, because it's essentially about scaffolding people, ensuring that we know that after injury, people's resources and demands kind of outweigh each other. So demands are often higher, resources lower, and we have to work with individuals to balance out the scales. And that's where it can be really useful to think about what else is contributing to your difficulties that we can perhaps work on. So it might be managing pain differently, or managing fatigue, coping with emotions. And again, VR sits really well within that environment. So then you kind of move a bit further down the line, and sort of 12 to 18 months, my sense is people are beginning to realise the need for changes. They're trying to get back into routines and roles. Insight is definitely increasing. Could be quite a lot of grief around roles that have been lost. And I think here is a really good stage for some really collaborative problem solving. I talk about a case where you could kind of see there was quite a lot of support that the family required at the start, but actually you could tell when they no longer needed us, because they were managing sort of quite sort of behavioural presentations just by problem solving themselves. So I think, again, if you're front loading early on and providing people with tools, people will adjust better and more independently. I think there has to be a great deal of work jointly regarding goals. Again, I think ongoing graded functional activity is really crucial here, because I think this is the place where people can get stuck, particularly if people have withdrawn and are sort of keeping themselves better safe than sorry. It can often mean that people are understimulated, and that in itself causes lots of difficulties and more fatigue. Again, the emotional coping and psychological work is really crucial here. So we often start listening out for appraisals of people's distress, because it's really important to think about, they have been through a traumatic event. For some people, that means the world no longer feels safe. For other people, it means that they feel it's their fault or they're being punished for something. And these kind of stuck emotional beliefs can block other rehab and other work. So this is a really good time to get in and start working on at that level with people regarding trauma. And I think I've put longer term. I mean, I don't think it stops there, but I think I'm trying to highlight that, you know, if you front load here, longer term, without this, what we tend to see is people have just been trying to survive. So their levels of distress increase. We know already that as time from injury increases, people's psychological distress increases without support. Might be comorbid mental health problems that have been developed. And I think higher intensity work's needed, and it might be that you were working with a client that actually may have been more low intensity, you know, 12 months ago, but now are very entrenched. I see a lot of issues around guilt and shame further down the line that also can cause blocks. So I think it's just thinking about how can we work differently, where are the points where people would really benefit from some scaffolding that then reduce the input further down the line and improve their experiences. So I mean, you've seen around the platform. So the current platform focus is very much, well, it started with emotional regulation. That was one of the reasons why we wanted to develop it. We felt that VR could hack the nervous system in a way that cognitively it could be difficult to work with individuals sometimes if they're experiencing quite a lot of mental inflexibility, or they might be thinking in very black and white ways, but actually providing people with tools to calm and soothe their brain on a more physiological level can help kind of make people feel a little bit more in control. So how I see it is it's a bit of a bottom-up sensory approach rather than a kind of top-down approach. And I think it's got great potential. From a motor speech benefits, I think I've already said the speech and language therapist felt that this would be really useful to provide a way of upping the dose of rehab and, you know, ensuring repetition as much as possible. From an attentional training point of view, I think I'm really, really interested in the role of attention in recovery and how graded exposure can help. And I think, again, VR can lend itself really well to that. Just as an example, this isn't in a VR setting, but it was a client we worked with, and he was probably about 7 years post-injury, and he'd had a really severe traumatic brain injury, had been in rehab, hadn't made huge gains in rehab because of how severe his injury was. And so he'd been discharged to a nursing home whilst waiting for funding. And he was in that nursing home for 5 years in essentially a darkened room. He had real difficulties with tolerance to noise and light, and had presented with a lot of challenging behaviour. So we got involved when he was moved from that environment to a rental property to start community rehab. And the goal was, I mean, one of the things he said he wanted to do was to go to the hairdressers. I mean, bearing in mind he had an inability to tolerate noise at all, and light was a real issue for him. Over a period of about 18 months, he engaged in a kind of graded exposure program, a bit covert, and in time he got to the hairdressers. And I think I remember kind of after that experience sort of watching him in that environment as he was sat on the chair getting his, you know, the shavers were on, the music was playing, he was chatting away. And I just think, actually, with the right scaffolding, and I know he was 7 years post and it was a really severe injury, and on paper that shouldn't have been able to happen, but actually it just shows that even though we talk about this kind of 12 to 18 month ceiling, and I still think early intervention's the best, I think the brain has great capacity for recovery. I think it's just about the environments that people find themselves in. So I think, kind of leading on from that, the next stage of where we want to head, I mean, we have regular debates as a team about what we want to do next with the VR platform, because I'm here, can talk about what I want to do next, but it's really to think about how, because I'm really interested in attention, and if we think about, actually, it's probably the most affected cognitive domain after injury. Yes, I think so, because sometimes clients will say, I'm really struggling with my memory, but when you unpick it, actually it seems to be more of a problem with attentional, difficulties with attention. And I think attention's great because if you imagine an umbrella, underneath there's lots of different types of attention, and we can target those different aspects of attention, and we can create kind of graded exposure through gaming, through the bridging into real life. And again, VR really helps with that. So I think that's where we as a team would like to go next. And again, I think it's got great potential. So currently the benefits of VR and the Brain Recovery Zone platform, we see it as a clinical rehab companion tool. So, you know, again, as I said, we're not saying it's replacing rehab, it's not, but there might be certain aspects that it can augment. It certainly supports learning by doing. For me, it reduces clinical time, and it's not that I'm trying to do myself out of a job, but I think I guess it allows me to focus on other things, whereas I know that clients can pick up and practice stabilizing techniques as and when they want to and learn more about their injury. And I think that's a real benefit. It's a really useful tool for emotional regulation. And as I said, I think it reduces some of the organic barriers of following an acquired brain injury around motivation and remembering to remember. If you have a physical device, and there's some research around having a physical device does help with engagement in sort of relaxation practices. And it very much sits in so my main ethos is when I'm working with people that after catastrophic injury, we have to develop this sort of idea around distress tolerance, that through life we'll experience painful events that we can't change straight away, or some of us might experience difficult feelings that are more overwhelming. And how do we build skills to help tolerate this distress? And again, I think VR can really help in this way, in terms of being a tool in a bigger toolkit, if you like. And I think it can give us some temporary relief from our pain, and it can help us cool down our emotions. So I think there are great benefits to it. So I've got a couple of case studies. One of them is from a CCG, and then another is a medical legal case. Now, I didn't attempt it because I'm terrible at this sort of thing, to embed a video inside the PowerPoint. Didn't work at all. I think it was too big for it. So I'm just going to stop my share and change videos, otherwise it's not going to play. This was a client referred to us by a local CCG. He had a severe traumatic brain injury following a fall in the Peak District. I think he talks about this in the video. He was a retired historian, and language and articulation and communication were massively important to him before his injury. And so this is just a really small clip of him. This is him quite early on after his injury, actually. We've discharged him now. He's currently writing his memoirs. But this is him talking a bit more. The focus is on the speech part of the platform.
Well, I got my brain injury last August. To be honest, I don't particularly understand the detail of what happened, but I know that what happened, I've been climbing up great in the Derbyshire Peaks, and in that I've fallen quite seriously and banged my head. And immediately after, I was with my wife and my son, and they rang the hospital, and initially it was the Sheffield Hospital who picked me up. And I was there for a few days. It was a serious injury. And to be honest, I don't remember it throughout it. Since I've been injured, I do struggle putting a coherent argument across with some of these things, particularly the way you might deal with communicating and listening. All the types of things are not necessarily easy for me. So what the camera does is help you with that. It helps you reflect on different images you see and reflect on how you can communicate with people. Make me feel better to cope with different situations and different places. Since having rehab at home and since using a VR headset, I feel more in control and like myself again.
So that was Ian. And I think one of the, I mean, this didn't come through, but one of the, again, I think the benefits of going in early with him was working with the family, because one of his difficulties was kind of perseverating on regrets in his past and then becoming really distressed about them. And family initially really struggled to know how to manage that. And there were other behavioural kind of difficulties. And I think at the start there would be a lot of sort of collaborative problem solving with them around strategies and what might be helpful and what might be unhelpful. And I think, again, over time, that was just internalized and that became something that they just naturally did. And so things that could have become quite large just didn't. And again, I think, whereas intervening later, it means that perhaps more high intensity work would have been required for that. So that was Ian. And then on to the other case study I was going to discuss. So this is a case that was referred to me by Think Therapy First. So I worked alongside an occupational therapist called Emma, fantastic. And the client in question, she'd had a significant traumatic brain injury secondary to a road traffic accident. I'm just going to obviously talk a bit about the work that I did, but it was in the context of a larger piece of work, really very much focused on managing fatigue, looking at meaningful activity. Emma had supported the clients to complete college, and then we're starting to think about kind of next stages. So things were going really well in that respect. I think one of the blocks, if you like, was the ongoing difficulties she had with regulating her emotions and tolerating distress. There was she found the unpredictability of her moods really, really frightening. There'd been some self-harm due to difficulties tolerating such high levels of emotional distress. And then alongside that, on top, she really had a very, very poor sleep routine. I'm not sure where I've pulled this figure from. And I think it's probably a bit of an underestimate, actually. After injury, people can experience significant difficulties with sleep. And I think that's due to a number of factors, some being around reduced ability to regulate mood, to wind down and to prime themselves ready for rest, and others around, cognitive fatigue and being so overtired that can also significantly impact upon sleep. So again, this was a joint intervention, and I think that it worked really, really well. And so my sessions were, I think it was a 6-session intervention, very much focused on emotional management, supporting the client to understand what emotional management is, the fact that we need to all develop tools with this, and this is something that is ongoing, and looking at different aspects to that plan around distraction and different active ways of distracting, and then self-soothing as well, and where VR could sit with that, both in terms of tolerating distress, practicing psychological strategies just to help calm herself and again feel a little bit more in control, and then also as a bit of a nighttime bridge for sleep. and it worked really well. And I think she's now discharged, I think. So yeah. So in addition, we're also doing a clinical trial. Again, I think the value of doing research is that you kind of find out what you don't know. And I've been saying this for feels like forever, that we're going to ethics, that COVID's massively slowed things down, but the protocol is just with the research and development departments. We are doing this in collaboration with Leeds Centre for Immersive Technology and University of Leeds and Hull University Teaching Hospitals. So we're very much, it's a feasibility study. So whilst, obviously clinically we've been applying it in practice just based on, evidence base that it kind of mimics the work that we do, but we're just packaging it out differently. What we do want to look at is exploring the efficacy of this, looking at emotional regulation and understanding of brain injury. So it's a 12-week guided self-rehab VR program. There are 2 sites at the moment, and it's a mixed methodology design. So that's our plan for this year. So just briefly, the testimonials are there, but it just, again, just repeats what I've said about where people might find this useful in terms of helping establish some behavioural routines and habits. So for one of our clients, it was around, again, using it before sleeping, kind of helped him physiologically unwind. And then I've worked with a client who's had an acquired brain injury, and school is very difficult for him, and not actually in school. It's sort of a cumulative effect of payback fatigue afterwards. So he uses it as one of his tools to help him sort of calm himself after school. So I think that was sort of it really in terms of final thoughts. I think just going back to the statistics at the start and the fact that the number of acquired brain injury admissions just continues to increase. Medical technology is improving all the time, but there's a gap because we have to think more creatively about how we work with individuals in a way that's targeted, and potentially a hybrid model of neuro rehab is a good way forward. And I think COVID again has accelerated that. We've probably all been delivering that through the last couple of years, but how can we standardize aspects of this? Because I think that's where tech can really help, both in terms of upping the dosage of rehab, which we know, the power law of repetition, that's how people improve, by just repeating. But then it can also help us standardize aspects of interventions. And I think it's, the future is really exciting. There's lots of, really, robotic training and, talk of brain computer interfaces, which, is really exciting stuff. I think the bit that we have to be really careful of is that we need to keep in mind the importance of being human and identity being such a pivotal part of rehab. I was speaking to a client, and he'd had a brain injury following a car accident, and afterwards for a long period of time he talked about feeling incredibly numb and disconnected from himself and from other people, and that really affecting kind of how he felt about himself and about how human he felt. And he'd watched, I think it was Luther, and there was this heart rate monitor noise, and it must have triggered something in him, but it just caused an overwhelming kind of avalanche of emotions, and months and months and months of not feeling anything. And the next therapy session we had, he said, whilst it was really painful, it was the first time that he'd felt human after his injury. And I think it's just really important that I think we hold on to making sure we are attending to people's emotional needs throughout this process. So that's it from me.
Thanks so much, Catherine. One of the things that I always want to know is, how much does it cost? And I know they're sort of the headsets are pretty expensive. I'm sure people are quite eager to know sort of if we were recommending it, what the outlay would be, etc. I don't know if you're able to give us sort of some ballpark figures at all.
Yeah, sure. So, there are 2 choices as to what you can go for, depending on what the client needs. So when I was showing you around the demo, you can choose basically just the emotional regulation part of the platform. So if your client didn't need to have the attentional training and the speech aspect, that would be sort of an emotional regulation platform. And so cost for that would be, excluding VAT and shipping, 743. And then if you're wanting all of it together as a kind of comprehensive package, then it would be 1150. So there are different, that's quoted on the fact that we this headset basically comes in two models. So there's almost a home-based headset, which is, you're just going to use it for one person. There's a clinic-based headset. So for people where it's in hospital settings, then we would advise the level up, which is more expensive because it's more kind of hygienic. The insert's different, so it's more.
Yeah, probably for most of the people here, it'll be the lower cost because it'll be just one person using it in their own home, and that's a fixed cost, and then they can keep the headset forever and just keep using it until they don't need it anymore.
Yeah.
We did have one question on the chat, was something about this was from Mandy. I don't know if you want to unmute yourself, Mandy, but it said, do you use a handheld chuck device? And I don't really know what that means, but I thought I'd ask the question, and if you don't know, maybe Mandy can explain.
Can Mandy explain?
Yeah, no, what it is I've seen where they hold on to devices, and I'm thinking about motor as well, where they can use the device to actually control, almost like virtual hands, but get some function going as well. I didn't know whether that was included.
So the Oculus, which is, I guess, Facebook's alternative, do have two handheld controllers. And yes, so I think there's a function whereby it can look like your hands are in the virtual environment with you, which is amazing. We started to develop for Oculus actually, and then they changed the rules around, you've got to be linked to a Facebook account. And so it prevented us from doing this kind of ease of headset, put it on your head and send it out and it's there ready. It was not possible to continue with them. So currently the company that we use is called Pico. So it does come with this. So it's a controller, but I don't think I think the thing with Oculus is probably more of a gaming headset rather than this is perhaps more of a kind of training, kind of business to business headset.
Yeah, it sounds like that's a bit more fun and the other one's a bit more practical. If anyone's got any questions for Catherine, we do have some time, a few minutes left. I think the easiest thing is to either unmute yourself or show your camera, or just unmute yourself and ask away. And if two people speak at once, I'll try and figure out who you are and get you to go one at a time. Are there any questions? Oh, I think you stunned everyone into silence. It was a really fabulous talk. I mean, I can't see any hands up, but then I'm not very good at these Zoom meetings, to be honest with you. Oh, your hand's up. Sorry, you got another question. Go. Sorry, the last person I was looking at was you. Sorry, Mandy.
I'll lower my hand. Is that gone? Yeah. No. I find this really fascinating, and I think the thing is I could see a huge amount of potential. I work a lot with people with autism, and they have emotional dysregulation as well. And I'm working with somebody at the moment who it's more in the younger age range rather than the adult age range, but the things are still the same. It's about emotional regulation, decompressing after a hugely sensory environmental impact on their concentration. So I just wondered whether any of there's a cross section there between ABI and autism.
Yeah, I suppose it's probably on a case-by-case basis. I think I suppose the important thing would be to ensure it wasn't, even though it is designed as a low sensory environment, it would be, I mean, you'd know immediately if someone put it on their head whether they would tolerate it or not. Yeah, so I think it lends itself well to the younger generation because they're so sort of tech savvy.
Like me.
So it's very easy to use.
I'm just having a look, see if I can see any hands up, or if there's anything in the chat, if anyone wanted to ask any questions. If not, you think of something burning afterwards, you can always email either myself, most of you got my email, but Helen at thinktherapy1st.co.uk, or go email the training one that you responded to this for. But thank you all very much for attending. Special thanks to Catherine. It was a really helpful and informative. I think it's just so exciting. And I think we've probably used the VR on quite a few clients now, and they've all reported how beneficial it is and how much it's helped. And as you say, enhancing that therapy so that you can go around to more people is always good for us. So if no one's got anything else, then I shall bid you adieu. Is just double checking there's no hands up. If anyone wants to speak now or forever hold your peace, I think is the way to go. And otherwise I shall stop recording and end the meeting. If anyone wants a recording for a colleague that wasn't here, again, just email the training, and once I figured out how on earth to get it off this computer and over to Chris, I will make sure it gets sent on. But thanks for joining us, and I'm sure we'll be putting on some more talk soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.